What's going on, my lovely students? Time for another amazing math video. So we're going to talk some more about trig functions and specifically how to solve sides of a right triangle when it's not a special right triangle. Okay, so again, we're solving for a missing variable in a right triangle when it isn't a special triangle. Remember those two special types, 30, 60, 90 and 45, 45, 90. So whenever you have a triangle like this down here where you see the angle is a right triangle, but it's not a 30, 60, 90 or a 45, 45, 90. So right here we've got a 50, 40, 90. Whenever you have one of these, you got to ask yourself three questions. First of all, which sides do I know? As far as do I know the hypotenuse, the adjacents, the opposites? Which one do I know? And then what is it that we need? Which one of those three is it that I need to find? Okay, and again, there will be irrelevant information. They're going to give you things you don't really need. Okay, then once you identify those two things, you can answer the third question, which trig ratio do we use? Okay, so you'll base that off of which sides you have using SOHCAHTOA. Alright, so then you can set the equation and solve, and we're going to round our answers to the nearest hundredth. Okay, so first example, let's go ahead and remember SOHCAHTOA. So again, remember how to spell it. So, S-O with a silent H, CA, C-A with a silent H, and then TOA, T-O-A, to give us the OA sound. Alright, so remember this is sine equals the opposite over the hypotenuse, cosine is the adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is the opposite over the adjacent. Okay, so now that we remember that, let's answer the first question. Which side do we know? We know this side right here, which is across from 90, so that makes that our hypotenuse. Okay, second question, what side do we need? Alright, well, using this angle, okay, the angle that we're given, how does that relate to this side? Well, this side is the opposite of that angle. Alright, so we need to find the opposite, and we know the hypotenuse. Okay, so now what we're going to ask ourselves is which one of these trig functions uses the two sides that we're working with? We're working with the opposite and hypotenuse. So looking at the word SOHCAHTOA, we can identify it by finding where's the O and the H. Which trig function has O and H? Alright, so it looks like this one, O and H. That S in front of it tells us the trig function that goes with opposite and hypotenuse is the one that starts with letter S. Which one of these starts with letter S? Sine. So we're going to set up our equation as the sine, and you always do the sine, cosine, or tangent of the angle measure. Sine of 50 degrees is going to equal the opposite side, which we identified as x, over the hypotenuse, which is 20. Alright, so now all you've got to do to solve for x, you've got x divided by 20. So to solve for x, we will multiply by 20. The opposite of divide is multiply. Multiply both sides by 20. The 20s will cancel, and it leaves x equals. Now in your calculator, you'll make sure the mode, again, is in degrees, since we're typing in degrees, so you have to change from radians to degrees if it's not already changed, and type in 20 times the sine of 50 degrees. Whenever we type that in, you should get 15.32. And of course, that's going to be inches because the units we're working with is inches. So this side down here is 15.32 inches. Alright, let's do another one. So again, let's remember SOHCAHTOA. You're going to use this a lot on these, so you need to make sure you remember the word. Alright, so right here, first question. What is it we know? Alright, well, which side do we know? We know 6. Well, which one is it? Well, it's the one across from 23. So that's our opposite. We know our opposite. Which one are we trying to find? Alright, well, this is my hypotenuse because it's across from 90. So then if that's opposite and that's hypotenuse, the only other one that's left is adjacent. Okay, so we want to find the adjacent side, and we know the opposite. So which trig function is that uses the letter O and A? This is O and H, so it's not that one. This is A and H. Here's O and A. Alright, so we're going to use the trig function that starts with T. That's tangent. Tangent, remember you always do the sine, cosine, and tangent of the degree measure of 23 degrees equals the opposite side, which is 6, over the adjacent side, x. Okay, now on this one, you'll notice the variable is on the bottom this time. On the last problem, the variable, our x, was on top. So we just multiplied by the number on bottom. Well, in this situation, when your variable's on bottom, there's a really simple way to solve this. All you do is take the x, the variable, and take everything on the left side and just swap them. Okay, so we're going to move the x over here. Now we have x by itself. Then we put 6 over the tangent of 23 degrees. Okay, so you're just going to take everything on bottom, swap it with everything on the opposite side, and then you can type that in your calculator, 6 divided by the tangent of 23 degrees, and you should get 14.13. So this side right here, x, should be 14.13, whatever units we're talking about. Alright, so two different situations. Variable on the top, just multiply by the number on bottom. If the variable's on the bottom, swap it with the trig function that's on the other side of the equal sign. Alright, so you guys go ahead and try the problem down here. Pause the video and give it a try. Okay, so right here we should set up our equation as the sine of 65 degrees equals 8 over x. And the way we know that is because x is across from 90, so it's our hypotenuse. And then the one across from 65, the angle we're working with, is the opposite. That's what we know. We know the opposite. We want to find the hypotenuse. The trig function that uses opposite and hypotenuse is sine, because it's with O and H. So we do the sine of 65 degrees equals the opposite 8 over the hypotenuse x. Our variable's on the bottom, so we just swap it with the trig function. So now x equals 8 divided by sine 65 degrees. Type that in the calculator and you should get 8.83 feet is the units we're in. Alright, so moving on. Now sometimes you've got to use the inverse functions whenever you want to find a missing angle. So on the last problems, we knew the angle and we wanted to find missing sides. On this one, we know the sides, but we want to find what is the missing angle. All right, but you're still going to set up your equation the same way. It's just to solve, you've got to use the inverse trig functions that we've been talking about. All right, so to start off, let's figure out which sides we're working with. Of course, this is our 90-degree angle. So 80 is, you guessed it, the hypotenuse. Okay, of course, opposite of my angle is this side, so this is the opposite, but I don't have that one. I have this one. That's the adjacent, the one that's left over. Okay, so which trig function uses the hypotenuse and the adjacent, A and H? Okay, so look at it, that's O and H. This one's A and H. The cosine is A and H. So we'll do the cosine of my angle. All right, I mean, it's always the sine, cosine, and tangent of the angle. What's the angle? Oh, the angle is x. So cosine of x equals the adjacent side, which is 29, over the hypotenuse, which is 80. All right, now we want to solve for x. We practice these to get rid of cosine. We're going to do the arc cosine or inverse cosine, and that's going to cancel out the cosine and leave x. And then we type the inverse cosine on our calculator of 29 over 80, and you should get 68.7 degrees. 68.7 degrees is the measure of this angle. Alright, so let's let you guys try one real quick. I'll pause it, give it a try, and we'll see if you get it right. On this problem, you've got to identify what do I know and what am I trying to find. So I've got my hypotenuse, and I've also been given the opposite side of my theta, my angle. All right, so I'm going to try to find the angle. So if I'm given the hypotenuse and the opposite, which trig function is that? So O and H is the sine function. So I'm going to do the sine of the angle. The angle is what I don't know, so it's sine of theta equals the opposite side, 1.8, over the hypotenuse, 2.3. And then to solve for theta, I do the inverse sine or arc sine, and that leaves theta by itself. Arc sine of 1.8 over 2.3, and your calculator should give you 30 degrees. Alright, so let's do a real life problem here, a challenge problem a little bit. Okay, so Pauline's building a fence around her vegetable garden shown below. What length of fence would she need to build? So we need to know how much fence does she need. Well, up here we see she knows this is 5 meters, and this is 2.75 meters. So we definitely know she needs at least 7.75 meters, plus whatever the length of this side is, and the length of this side. So we need to figure out what those lengths should be. All right, well, if I draw a right triangle right here, okay, now let's just look at this triangle. So I want to find this length, x. I know this is 1.75. Well, that's this right here. So this is 1.75. And I know this angle is 49.4 degrees. So I can use a trig function to solve for x. Well, which trig function should we use? Well, x is our hypotenuse, and 1.75 is the opposite side from our angle. So which trig function uses opposite and hypotenuse? You guys should know from SOHCAHTOA, opposite and hypotenuse are with the sine. So we'll do the sine of the angle measure, 49.4 degrees, equals opposite 1.75 over x. And then this is a situation where variable's on the bottom, so we're going to swap these. So x is going to equal 1.75 over the sine of 49.4 degrees. And whenever you type that in, you should get 2.30. Alright, so now we've got to do the same thing over here to find the length of the other side. So we're going to do a right triangle right here. And again, this is 1.75. And we want to know what's this. This is our x. So opposite again and hypotenuse again. So we're still going to use the sine. But now we're going to do the sine of a different angle. 68.1 is going to equal the opposite, 1.75, over the hypotenuse x. And we're going to solve it the same way. Swap them. So x equals 1.75 over the sine of 68.1 degrees. And we type that in the calculator, and you should get 1.89. Alright, so now we just got to take 1.89 and 2.30 and add them on to 5.1 and 2.75. And those four numbers should add up to be 11.94 meters. So that's the total amount of fence that Pauline's going to need to buy in order to build a fence around her vegetable garden. Alright, well, appreciate your all's time today. Let's go ahead and practice some problems and master this stuff, get it down.